When I first learned about the dynamic equity split, there was one thing I definitely wondered, which is equity really changing week to week? Or does somebody like hold the equity and then like dole it out after a month or 6 months or a year? Well, the bottom line is it really depends on how you use the system. And the thing to keep in mind is, the business has no real dollar value. But once these things happen, once you have a big investor or you sell the business or you make revenue, things start to get more complicated. And that's like definitely when you want to bring in an attorney. And that's definitely when you might have to like issue equity if you haven't yet. But if you go onto the slicingpie.com website, you can actually buy an LLC agreement that makes it so that equity actually does change on a weekly basis based on your slices of the pie. So you can build it in so that it is actually changing weekly. Not that you'd want to check it weekly, but it is changing weekly. Either way, you should probably have an attorney as soon as your business starts making good value, or it starts, put a lot of work into it, or it starts making revenue. You should work with an attorney that's familiar with these concepts. And if you don't have one, I will recommend one towards the end of this video. So Jan and I in the previous example were working completely free, but you're going to run into situations where not all team members can work for free. And how do you deal with that? Well, in that case, their slice of the pie, slice of equity, gets based on the portion of their salary that they're not getting paid out. So for example, let's say Jan's market salary is $60,000, but she really needs $40,000 to pay her bills. Well, if she's salary, what I would do here is, of course, pay her $40,000 over a year. Equity, I need to calculate what that is, what she's going to get on a weekly basis. And so I use the daily resource rate calculation here, times 2 divided by 250, and that's 160. That's her daily resource rate for pie. So every day she works, she gets that much of the pie. If she's hourly, again, I'm a bigger fan of that, we'll figure out her hourly rate by just saying 40,000 divided by 2,000 hours. So that's $20 an hour. That's her cash payment. To calculate her equity, I'm going to use the hourly resource rate times 2 divided by 2,000. And that's also happens to be $20. So for every hour she works, she gets $20 cash and $20 applied towards pie. What about freelance or consultant team members? Really people who are doing short-term work. Well, first of all, you want to make sure when you're working with them that you get them to be honest about their startup consulting rate, because you're going to take that and multiply it by 2 to apply towards pie. And this rate, this startup consulting rate, is really what they would give a small business. So you make sure you're getting a fair rate here. If they're going to be a long-term team member, longer than say 6 months, you might want to make sure the rate's in line with the rest of the team. Otherwise, some of them might not be happy about that. So you take the consulting rate times 2, and that's their resource rate applied towards pie. With short-term team members, you might want to include in their contract a buyback option. What this means is that you're reserving the right to buy out their slice of the pie within 1 year if you pay the total value of that pie, which is, multiplied by 2. After a year, if you don't buy it back within a year, I think you kind of have to let it ride. That's why you have to do it within a year, because they took that risk on you, they're betting on you, and at that point, you got to let their bet ride. Let's take a look at an example. So let's say your contractor hourly rate is $40 an hour. You're doing some work for me. So to calculate how much of the pie that's going to be worth, that's double that, $80 an hour. Total hours you build is 80 hours for some total of $6,400. One buyback option would be to buy it back at that double rate within a year. So that'd be $6,400. I pay you that 8 months later, I get my equity back. There's another interesting option, which would be a sliding scale over a year. So if I pay you month 1 of doing the work, right, I only pay you 100% of your rate, not double. I pay you 100% of that because you're getting paid on time. But the longer I wait, the more I have to pay you back until on month 12, if I want the equity back, I have to pay you double. Kind of an interesting sliding scale way of doing it. But again, do whatever feels right to you. Another thing you should have in your buyback option is a protection clause. Meaning, if the company sells or go public within 1 year of buying back somebody's equity, they have the right to receive full value. So here's an example. If I bought back your equity at $6,400 and then 6 months later we sell the company and your equity would have been worth $20,000, I have to pay you the difference. So I would owe you $20,000 minus $6,400 that I already paid equals $13,600. Why is this important? Because this prevents companies from buying back right before selling or getting a big investment. It's just something really fair to do for the people you're working with. This brings me to talk about absentee owners, basically anybody who owns Pi who's not an employee or an investor. As you're building your business, you want to try to get as little of these people involved as possible. Because when you get into things like investment, like investors don't like having people who own slices of the pie that don't work on it. And also it can demoralize other people on your team if they feel like, other people who don't work here are still getting value from all the work we're putting into it. So if you think somebody may bail, it might be a good idea to have that buyout clause in their contract and do it in the beginning, right? So they know you can do it. And also, don't let this make you think you need a buyout for everyone. I know when I was first learning about this, I thought, oh, well, why wouldn't I put something in there so I can buy out everybody? But really, you don't have to do that because when employees leave, there's certain ways that you should treat them, which we'll get to later in this video. Next up, an unfortunate side effect of earning Pi with hours is that it can motivate people to work more hours and maybe on stuff that they shouldn't be working on. So a good way to combat that is to get in the habit of always estimating tasks with other people that you work with. So if they estimate, 10 hours to get something done, they should feel like they have 10 hours. And if they need more time than that, maybe they just need to check with you or revise the estimate somewhere online, right? So that somebody's being accountable for the hours and that somebody's not working on something hours, for like tens or hundreds of hours at a time that you don't think is worth it. Thanks for watching. So now you've got a good idea of how to pay people in Pi, but what about when somebody working for the company for free decides to put in their own money? They take on that additional risk. How does that translate into Pi? And what about when somebody donates equipment to you? Do you pay them in Pi? Can you pay your rent in Pi? That's coming up in the next video. Let's take a look at an example, and then I'm going to show you. Let's take a look at an